Okay, so I think it's live. I'll just wait for a couple of seconds and just see whether the audio and everything looks fine or not. And then we'll start with the agenda for today. Okay, I think there is a audio lag. Okay, I think there is a audio lag. No, I think it's fine. Okay, I think there is a audio lag. No, I think it's fine. Okay, I think there is a... Yep, let's start with the agenda. Okay. All right, so the agenda is pretty clear. Today we are going to be discussing about, a reading session with me. I'll read a couple of ideas from this psych website. Now, one of the, good things about subscribing to a newsletter like that of a psych or an Eon is that they constantly send you articles to munch on, and it basically breaks down the monotony, what the hell the monotonous nature of your preparation. Okay, so yeah, so you should be reading. I mean, if you're not too much afraid of the test, and if you're thinking कि अरे मेरी तो लग जाएगी अगर मेरा time waste हो गया, तो if you're not that much scared, then you can read. But if you're scared कि यार एक second important है, एक minute important है, then possibly you can just do away with reading comprehension and solving RC passages. But then again, I think that also becomes monotonous after a point in time. So it becomes good. Just read for fun. Just read for understanding arguments and making sense of certain ideas. So yeah, so I am subscribed to Psych. It's a sister company, or you can say a collaborative this thing with Eon. They basically send you articles just like Eon website. The only difference between a Psych and Eon is that wherein Eon focuses on everything, Psych just focuses on atypical genre of this thing, literature. Typically, you can say psychological type, philosophical type. Mostly the articles revolve around those types. You can see also, right, that one of the articles is aphantasia can be a gift to philosophers and critics like me. And then there is another one which is like how to decide whether to take antidepressants or not. So these are good reads sometimes. You just, if you're going through some issues also, they'll help you. And then something like a very abstract article, Seeing Grieving as a Learning, explains why the process takes time. All right, so what I typically like to do is I take the first one and the last one, because that basically covers everything. And yeah, that is my way of going about these passages. Having said that, I would like to take my opportunity to start off with this one. I'll read it for quite some time and try and understand if at all there are any arguments that we needed to understand or anything of that sort. At the same time, there's another article also. I'll take that also. I'll see which one. I mean, it's not like I'll flint from one article to the other. I'll try to complete most of the article, and then I'll go to the next one. Okay. Having said that, let's try and understand what this article is about. So the basic underlining this thing is aphantasia can be a gift to philosophers and critics like me. So one thing that you can understand is that the person who is going to the person who is writing this thing is a critique, right? All right, now let's just read this one. There's an early memory from my childhood representative of its peak happiness. I am on a simple iron seats iron child seat on my father's bike. He's just picked me up from kindergarten and is taking me home through the forest on the way to our house. It is a spectacularly fluorescent Danish spring, and we are traveling through woodland illuminated from above by the light of green foliage of the tall beeches, only just coming into soft leaves, and from below by snow white forest anemones spreading around us in dense, endless carpets. Now, this is you can say it's more like an anecdote, a person's anecdote, a description of a certain, idea, you can say area or something. Okay, let's go to the next one. We'll keep on reading this thing as in we will try and understand if at all there is anything interesting. Bringing this scene to my mind, I don't see anything. I have aphantasia, a neurological condition of being unable to visualize imagery. Okay. Also described as the absence of mind's eye. Still, I know that those visual elements were there. They are stored in my mind as a knowledge and concepts. And I have particular and strong emotional responses to the thoughts of the lights and colors. So, it is a description of the scenery, but then when he is describing it, he is not able to visualize those scenery. It's an interesting idea, and that condition is a neurological condition called as aphantasia. So I had no idea. I mean, I obviously, how do we know? We are no common man. How do we know these kind of conditions? Until very recently, I had always assumed that my experience of reality was typical, and that being able to see only things that are actually there, present and visible in the external surrounding, was normal. But discovering that I have aphantasia brought to my awareness a difference in perception and self-conception between me and others that I'd always registered on some level and felt disturbed by, but had never consciously thought about. So, I mean, what is there to explain? It's self-explanatory. Until very recently, I had always assumed that my experience of reality was typical, and that being able to only see that are actually there, present and visible in the external surrounding, was normal. But discovering aphantasia awareness, all right. The further I delve into research on this neurological anomaly, the more extensive its explanatory reach has proven. It has been like finding the master key to my life and personality, and has significantly deepened my understanding of my psychology and my philosophical views and my aesthetic and literary preferences. Because of this condition, and doing a little bit of research on it, he has developed some sort of an understanding of his psychology and philosophical view and his literary or aesthetic preferences. Literary preference, we all know, something we like to read, something we like to learn about. Aesthetic preference is something that we would like to visualize, or something that we like to see. For example, an aesthetic preference for in aesthetic performance for a drunkard would be to go to a drinking alley or something. The aesthetic preference for a monk would be to sit in the scenic or maybe in the woods doing all sort of meditative practices. So that is the basically difference between aesthetics and literary this thing. The distinction between what is and what isn't there in external reality is, of course, problematic, as philosophy has observed through ages and has been confirmed by modern neuroscience. On the predictive processing model of consciousness, one of the more prominent neuroscientific theories today, most of what humans perceive as external reality is projection. Did you understand? The neuroscientist Anil Seth thus explains that the phenomena we experience as objective and independently existing in our surroundings are, to a great degree, our brain's best guesses about reality, generated as a response to an external reality, but based on saved data and expectation, and as such, a form of controlled hallucination. Now, this is a very interesting line, because this, I think This is a logical link to what is going to be there ahead in the passage. So before this, everything that we read, we could have actually left it also at the face value. But here you are given a text, okay, a paragraph that specifically talks about what is and what isn't in external reality is problematic because, according to the neuroscientist Anil Seth, the phenomena we experience as objective and independently to some degree is just a brain's best guess about that reality. That's a very hard hitting line for somebody who is not really familiar with such texts, but then nevertheless. This makes me wonder how I am able to project unconsciously what happens to me as fully fledged external reality, and thus successfully form images as a part of my brain's predictive processing, but not consciously create images. So his problem is that he cannot consciously create images. So while he was projecting, or let's say while he was, thinking about the childhood memory with traveling with his father across those woods and whatever, he was not able to form the images of those, let's say, past events. But then he's able to project unconsciously what appears to him fully fledged external reality. Now that is an interesting idea. How can I perceive anything visually? I asked Seth about this at a talk I attended, and he put me in touch with a psychologist, Adam Zeman, at the University of Exeter, who is involved in some of the first extensive studies on aphantasia. Zeman gave me a test that measures visual vividness on a continuum. While such tests entail some uncertainty, in part because they rely on subjective reporting, which is fallible. I think you should know the meaning of fallible. The result was unambiguous. I have extreme aphantasia, that is, no ability to summon up internally even the vaguest, blurriest contours of a specific object. Neither my memory nor my imagination has any visual dimension. So he cannot bring his... It's very, hard hitting for anybody who doesn't have aphantasia, because we always can go back to the ideas that, this happened and that happened, and we call that nostalgia, by the way. So for an example, I'll take a very simple example, and I'll be hoping that you guys would be able to understand that. So suppose that you're going on a date, the first date that you went out with a girl. Okay, the first date. You'll always remember everything, every details of it. What the girl was wearing. Okay, in which case, suppose you're a girl, then maybe you will be thinking what the boy was wearing. Nitty-gritties, right? Because we are only talking about the visual perspectives, I'm not taking into the auditory or the olfactory symbols, like the smell of the perfume or whatever they were wearing. But then the visual things, like exactly what we did. Okay, not elaborating on it. All right. What is there then in the absence of visual context? Wow, that is an interesting idea. I'm actually liking this passage. I haven't read this before. This is the first time I'm reading it. All right, let's read this one. What is there then in the absence of visual content? Imagination is heterogeneous, comprising various dimensions, and spatial kinesthetic imagination can seemingly be preserved in aphantasia. Philosopher Derek was aphantasic and described his memories as propositional and stored in sentences. I would rather describe my imagination and memories as conceptual and emotional, consisting of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. I cannot visualize my childhood home, but with a combination of conceptual and spatial memory, I can describe it. And if I do, notice I'll start moving my hands and body if I were in the house. I can feel it almost physically when I think of it. So basically, there is no visual this thing, but the same thing that I was, mentioning, maybe the auditory ideas or the olfactory ideas were there present in this fellow, Derek Parfit's description of his childhood home. He cannot see that visually in his imagination or in his memory, but then he can feel it. Lamp and Statue, Venice, Derek Parfit, and courtesy Jen Radcliffe Richards. All right, interesting one. let's appreciate the beauty of the image for a while. All right, now let's go. I think Zeman also supplied me with a report on the first systematic study of the neuropsychological and neural signature of aphantasia, which confirms many of the hypotheses formed on the basis of self-reporting and anecdotal evidences. It connects aphantasia to introversion and autistic spectrum features, to difficulty with recognition, including face recognition, to impoverished autobiographical memory and less event details in general memory, to difficulty with atemporal and future directed imagination, including difficulties with projecting oneself into mentally constructed scenes, and the future to elevated levels of IQ and mathematical and scientific occupations. Okay, so yeah, let's not, this is no ideas, just facts, makes him fascinated, right? But for me, the emotions and thoughts evoked by literary scenes of strong visuality are sufficiently stimulating to stay engaged and fascinated. They invoke qualities and moods and often trigger a strong and compelling longing to see the actual thing. I have, however, always had a strong preference for philosophical and conceptual literature. My favorite book is Robert Musil's The Man Without Qualities, 1930, which aphantasia could plausibly account for, as well perhaps as for my relative indifference to poetry compared to most people who work with literature professionally. So he is not fond of this thing, poetry, or let's say he's indifferent to poetry, like he has no particular agenda with it. All right. Though usually described in negative terms and as a deficit, I suspect aphantasia isn't simply a reduced experience of reality. This may, of course, be wishful thinking, but considering the perceived difference between my experience of the world and that reported by others, it seems to me that the mind and body compensate, and what the absence of some feature leads to exaggeration of others. Zeman himself notes something similar, suggesting that aphantasia may come with increased interest in the visual world, and so my description of aphantasia in terms of what is absent inevitably veers towards what is in turn present. So 2-3 things, the thoughts that come to my mind, or the argument that I would like to make out of this particular para, is that yes, there is a connotation of a deficit related to, maybe related to aphantasia, but the author here is saying that maybe there is a deficit, there isn't a deficit, I don't care. What I care mostly is that if there is a deficit, the other bodily functions basically compensate for it. Just now I was mentioning that auditory, olfactory mechanisms can actually let's say compensate for it. If I have to really give a brief analog to it, just now I mentioned that imagine yourself doing the first date with the girl, okay, the first girlfriend of yours, or for the first boyfriend for that matters. We can definitely remember quite a few details, but then do you exactly remember how the touch felt, or the smell of the perfume, or how exactly things were? So we don't necessarily have all the mechanisms intact. Maybe the visual one is there intact, but the olfactory and the auditory ones may be taking a back seat. So in his basically perception, or his idea, because he has this aphantasia in which he has a problem, or let's say not problem, but he has this condition wherein he is unable to perceive visual imagery, but then his senses are actually helping him cope up with it by compensating it. Just like he mentioned that the psychiatrist, or that whatever fellow that in the last para we read, that when he was describing his childhood home, he could actually almost feel that he is standing in his childhood home, maybe doing some sort of or the feeling is there, let's put it that way, the feeling is there. Interesting one. I am all right, so I'll read 2 more paras and then I'll conclude this one. Aphantasia seems to me with a greater sensitivity to direct visual impressions. Aphant's inability to imagine or recollect beauty so imagine or recollect beauty internally and privately may well make the meeting with it externally more overwhelming. This could explain the difference in response to both beauty and ugliness noticed by myself and others throughout my life. The appreciation of beauty is of course fundamentally human, but the reaction to strong visual stimuli, films, nature, etc., has always been remarkably intense. I am often made socially uncomfortable when experiencing a spectacular scenery in the company of others. It is difficult to contain myself and stay engaged in the conversation when my disbelief and absorption of what I am seeing feels norm divergent and over the top. A fantastic absence of the mind's eye may account for a particular kind of visual vulnerability. This world conversely explain my exaggerated negative and depressive response to ugly surroundings, since aphants don't have an option of compensating for any external lack of beauty with exciting internal visuals. All right, so he is just giving his anecdote and how typically he feels this situation has helped him understand himself. All right, so let's just conclude this. The aphantasia also explains, at least in part, why in contrast with many people I meet, I find it hard and unnatural to tell my life story. I don't really think of my past, and when asked about it, I find it difficult to recall and recount, nor have I ever had specific ideas or visions for my future, only abstract thoughts of wishing to be happy, intellectually stimulated, healthy, with good people in my life, and access to natural beauty. Okay, the flip side of this disconnection from the past and the future. Okay, so maybe this is although not the end of the passage, but I am taking it as the concluding para. The flip side of this disconnection from the past and the future is seemingly an increased ability to be present. Indeed, the aphantasia studies report notes the possibility of less mind-wandering frequency in aphants, and it seems plausible that fantasizing about the past, future, or any fictional scenario will be far less engulfing with no visual content to entertain the mind. So basically what he's saying is that he's more let's say he's not like other laymans who would like to indulge in the past or the future. So somebody who can have a strong visual let's say apparatus in their minds, or let's say in the author's lingo, the mind's eye, they would typically be a little bit they can waste some amount of their time in the past, or maybe either thinking about the future, predicting the future, or fearing the future, that there is like our students ki yaar cat mein kya hoga, I don't know. So these people, because they don't have a visual apparatus, they don't have a machinery which is in place that can actually give them the visual stimulus for the past and the future, typically what happens is that they stay in the present, and that basically I think has helped him. And so basically he's just giving a positive connotation to what he's been experiencing. And I think that is it. I don't really think I need to go any further. There are not many lines. So let's just conclude it. Yeah, there are just 3 paras. Let's just conclude it. Yeah. All right, let's just conclude it because only 3 paras are there. I would rather hypothesize that aphantasia comes not only with a greater ability to be present and remain undistracted, but also with a reduced sense of self. In his book Reasons and Persons 84, Parfit formulates the view that personal identity is reducible to physical and psychological continuity of mental states, and that there is no further fact, a diachronic entity or essence that determines his identity. The belief that persons are separate entities with continuously existing selves, he argues, is to a great extent an illusion. The connection between this reductionist account of personhood and Parfit's aphantasia seems to me obvious. Our philosophical views are based on the intuitions which are in turn formed by our neurology or perception of experience of the world guides our perpetual experience of the world guides our ideas about it. Speaking to Larissa McFarquhar for her article How to Be Good in the New Yorker, Parfit reports on his inability to visualize imagery, having a few memories of his childhood, almost never thinking about his past. This diminished sense of continuity and substantiality of his own self will likely have directed him towards general anti-essential hypothesis about personhood. So basically from self, he's looking at selfhood. So from a human, he's looking at, you get the idea, right? So he's actually being able to dissect himself from the essence of him. That's a little too vague, but then this is exactly what it is written there. Let's just read this one. Aphantasia could certainly explain why Parfit's theory resonates so strongly with me, as well as my sympathy for Eastern contemplative and monoist theories such as Buddhism that advocate self-abandonment, detachment, renunciation. While many people find such non-essential ideas of personhood and existence disturbing and estranging, to me they're not only obviously plausible but highly relatable and easy to practice. When I introspect, I literally see nothing, and on that basis it is likely more difficult to create and uphold an idea of a centered, essential and continuous self. So yeah. While the aphantastic imagination and memory have, sorry, I think the headphone is a little tight. Yeah. While the aphantastic imagination and memory have fewer dimensions and likely less richness, the mind seems to compensate for this with a stronger absorption in and greater intimacy with the present moment. My sense of connection to my past is weak. I have very few memories, like one flying through the anemone lighted forest on my father's bike, and they rarely come to my mind. The colors and light of the present are always capturing my attention. So basically the essence of the passage is that he is not sad about his conditions. He has given away far more research based analysis of how his experience is helping him actually get ahead in life better. And one of the most important things was that he is able to recollect the idea that I'm not wasting my time, I am more in the present, and I can accept complex philosophical conditions like that of a Buddhist ideology or something of that sort very easily, because typically what these Buddhist theories or practices ask you is self-detachment, renunciation, and then because I don't have a visual imagery inside me, I can do those things very easily. So that's a very interesting let's say a personal note. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this one. In the next session I'll be doing the reading session or the analysis for this one, Seeing Grieving as Learning explains why the process takes time. I think this is also going to be a little bit interesting, but in the next session I'll